You know, they never really forgot what they did to you. Every hurtful word, every silent moment that shattered youth, they remembered it all, down to the smallest detail. They knew exactly what they said. They saw the pain in your eyes. They watched you fall apart, and yet they said nothing. No apology, no explanation, just complete silences, if your pain never even existed. But what if I told you this was all part of a plan? This wasn't some accidental forgetfulness or a moment of immaturity. It wasn't a mistake either. This was deeper, something Carl Jung talked about: psychological projection. It's a defense mechanism that can wreck relationships, mess with minds, and spread guilt like a virus. Jung taught us that when people can't handle their own dark parts, their shadows, they shove those parts onto someone else. And you became that someone. They didn't forget your pain, they needed you to carry their own. Because truly remembering what they did to you, truly owning up to it, would mean something they've been avoiding their entire lives: accountability. And accountability, to them, that's a death sentence for the false identity they worked so hard to build. So instead, they chose to erase you. They protected their lie by sweeping your pain under the rug. They moved on, not because they healed, but because they refused to look back. Not because they forgot, but because remembering would force them. Awakening takes courage. Courage they simply never built. And this is the part that hurts the most. Their silence wasn't weakness or confusion. It wasn't them not knowing what to say. It was strategy. Because when they stay silent, it's on you to fill in the blanks. You start replaying every word, questioning every feeling, doubting everything you once believed was real. And that, when they win. But here's the thing. Not anymore. What you're about to hear will change how you understand betrayal. It'll reveal the psychology behind the coldest kinds of hurt, and explain exactly why they left without a trace of guilt. This isn't just a video. This is your awakening. Stay with me. Carl Jung believed that every person carries a hidden side, a shadow self, we don't want to see. Not because it's not real, but because admitting it would shatter the image we have of ourselves. This shadow holds everything we deny: guilt, rage, fear, control, even the parts that hurt others. Most people don't face their shadow. They run from it, bury it, hide it behind politeness, smiles, and insincere apologies. But the shadow doesn't disappear. The more they deny it, the more it leaks out. And one day, it finds a target. That target, it's you. You didn't provoke it. You didn't deserve it. But because of who you are, kind, empathetic, willing to understand, you became the perfect mirror for their darkness. People don't project onto strangers. They project onto those they feel safe with. And that's why you suffered. They didn't attack you for being you. They attacked you for what they couldn't be. Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us in others can lead us to a deeper understanding of ourselves." But instead of choosing understanding, most people choose escape. They escape by blaming you, shaming you, hurting you, anything but hurting themselves. Because in their world, admitting fault means collapse. So they shift the burden onto you. They made you feel guilty for your wounds. They made you question your reactions to their abuse. They made your truth feel like a crime. This wasn't accidental. This was projection in its purest, most dangerous form. And here's the truth. Jung saw more clearly than anyone else. People don't just hurt you by accident. Sometimes they use you, not out of love or connection, but to bleed out what they're too afraid to face inside themselves. You became their release valve, their emotional scapegoat, even their unconscious therapist. But that weight, their shadow, you were never meant to carry it. Their pain wasn't about you. It was the only way they knew to run from themselves. We tell ourselves things to survive betrayal. Maybe they forgot. Maybe they weren't thinking. Maybe they were going through something. Maybe they didn't mean it. But Carl Jung would tell you this truth. They didn't forget. They chose not to remember. Forgetting is passive. Forgetting happens by accident. But what they did was different. It was intentional. Not cruelty planned out like a villain, but a conscious choice to avoid awareness. See, awareness comes with a cost. Really remembering means admitting the destruction they caused. It means looking in the mirror and facing the parts of themselves they've spent a lifetime dodging. For some people, that kind of self-awareness is unbearable. So instead, they build an illusion. They tell themselves you were too sensitive, you misunderstood, you made it worse. They rewrite the story in real time, changing facts into opinions, blurring the truth, turning pain into misunderstanding. Because accountability demands change, and change threatens their survival, not their physical survival, but the survival of the image they cling to. The idea that they're good, that they didn't do anything wrong, that they're a victim of misunderstanding. So, they don't just refuse to apologize, they refuse to even remember. Because memory is a mirror, and mirrors are dangerous when you're hiding from your own reflection. Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Terrifying because it means owning every shadow, every cruel word, every selfish choice. Every time they saw you break and stayed silent, they didn't protect themselves from you. They protected themselves from the shame that would consume them if they let the truth in. So no, they didn't forget. They didn't move on. They buried the memory deep under layers of denial, self-justification, and silence. But here's what Jung knew. Buried guilt doesn't disappear. It transforms. It becomes projection, distortion, the quiet violence of pretending nothing ever happened. So the next time you wonder why they never apologized, don't assume they forgot. Assume they're protecting something, not their heart or love, but their image. And to protect that image, they had to erase you, because remembering you means facing themselves. Carl Jung had this powerful idea. Every one of us wears a mask. He called it the persona. It's that carefully crafted character we present to the world, not to show who we truly are, but to conceal the parts of us we'd rather keep hidden. It starts off pretty harmless, the work version of yourself. A polite, "I'm fine," or the smile you wear even when you're falling apart on the inside. For some people though, that mask becomes everything. It isn't just something they put on for others, they start believing it themselves. And here's where things get risky, because to them, the persona must always be innocent, always justified, always good. So what happens when that mask slips? When they hurt somebody, do they own up and apologize? Usually not. Instead, they double down, because admitting fault would mean shattering the image they depend on to hold themselves together, not just in society, but inside their own head. Jung called this kind of living the provisional life. It's a life based not on being authentic, but on maintaining an illusion of control, of virtue, of always being the good one. These folks don't grow. They just defend, justify, and intellectualize anything and everything, except their own flaws. If their actions hurt you, they rarely ask, "What did I do?" It's almost always, "Why are you so upset?" Because to them, your pain is a threat to their carefully constructed sense of perfection. To keep up that mask, they have to minimize your reality. Your trauma gets brushed off as drama. Your honesty is twisted into an attack. Your healthy boundaries are recast as betrayal. And little by little, without even noticing, you begin to shrink just to protect their image. You stop asking for what you need. You hide your hurt. You walk on eggshells just to keep the peace. But peace that demands your silence. That's not peace at all. That's emotional captivity. Jung warned us. What you resist not only persists but grows in size. The more someone protects their mask, the more destructive their shadow, those denied, hidden parts becomes, because living a provisional life isn't really living, it's performing. And you were never cast in their drama to be seen as you are. You're there to validate the role, the script they refuse to stop playing. Here's another thing. The mask isn't just for how others see them. Sometimes it's for themselves too. Because if they ever took it off, even for a moment, they'd have to finally confront the damage they've done. You probably thought their silence meant confusion. That maybe they just didn't know what to say. Or maybe they were processing. Maybe you believed they needed space, or time to think, or even time to heal. But the truth is darker than that. Silence isn't always absence or ignorance. Sometimes, silence is a weapon. Here's how it works. When someone hurts you, and then says nothing, you're left to fill in the blanks. You start going over everything in your head, overthinking, doubting yourself. Was I overreacting? Was I just too sensitive? Maybe I misunderstood. While your mind races, they remain unmoved, untouched by the chaos they left behind. Jung warned, whose silence isn't neutral. For emotionally manipulative people, it's a psychological weapon. It distorts reality. It flips accountability. When they don't answer, you start apologizing for even asking. When they don't explain, you invent reasons to justify what they did. Their silence builds a void. And in that void, your mind constructs a prison. You overthink, overanalyze, end up blaming yourself for the distance they created. Meanwhile, they bask in the illusion of innocence. Jung understood something profound about this dynamic. Where real wisdom reigns, there's no fight between thinking and feeling. But in this kind of silence, you end up feeling deeply but thinking yourself into guilt. And that's exactly the point. The more you second-guess yourself, the more powerful they feel. Silence becomes their throne, and your desperate need for closure becomes the crown they never earned. Each time you reach out, each time you try to explain yourself, every time you beg for clarity, you're handing them control. The silence wasn't accidental. They gave it to watch you crumble. They weaponized absence. Emotional detachment became a form of domination. Sometimes silence isn't avoidance. Sometimes it's precisely a calculated tool to keep you uneasy, always hoping, always chasing an apology that will never come. And the more you chase, the more you're convinced you're the problem. But you were never the problem. You were always the mirror. And they hated what they saw, so they said nothing. Not because they didn't care, but because they knew, if they held out long enough, you would start punishing yourself for their mistakes. And in that silence, they didn't just escape blame. They built your cage. It's rarely obvious. At first, it's subtle. Maybe a raised eyebrow, a dismissive tone, or a comment like, "You're being dramatic," or, "I don't remember it that way." Slowly, piece by piece, your certainty starts to erode. You start doubting what you felt, then what you saw, and eventually, who you are. This is what's known as the Gaslight Loop, and it's deeper than simple manipulation. Jung called this shadow projection, the unconscious act of pushing our darkest parts onto someone else so we don't have to face them. But projection isn't quite enough on its own, because once that shadow is on you, they still have to make sure that you accept it. That's where gaslighting comes in. They don't just deny what happened, they rewrite it, they minimize it. They twist it so that you become the unstable one. Suddenly, your pain is just an overreaction. Your memory becomes untrustworthy. Your truth becomes a nuisance. And after enough of their revisionist history, you're no longer the one who was hurt. You're just too much, too sensitive, too emotional, too reactive. And eventually, you start to believe them. Why? Because you want things to make sense, to restore peace, to be loved with them. Love comes with a condition. Forget your own reality. But here's what Jung discovered. People project not just to escape shame. For some folks, it's about survival. Their entire identity is wrapped up in being the good one, the misunderstood one, the morally justified one. So any pain you express is a threat. They use your empathy against you. They'll say you're exaggerating, accuse you of attacking them, sometimes even cry when you confront them, so you wind up comforting the very person who caused the wound. Their guilt becomes your apology, their chaos, your responsibility. And every time you give in to their version of reality, you lose a bit of your own. This isn't confusion, it's control. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that distorts, quietly. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." In their world, you are destined to play the villain, not because it's true, but because their delicate identity can't survive seeing themselves as anything else. And so, the cycle repeats. They hurt you, erase it, blame you, then make you doubt it ever happened. You're left carrying a truth that was never really yours to hold. There's a kind of person who always seems to skate away without fault. No matter what goes wrong, they're never the one to blame. They're never the aggressor. They never have to change. You know the type. They cry first, explain the loudest, and somehow make you feel like the villain, even though you're the one bleeding. Carl Jung warned about this psychological mask. He called it the Innocent Archetype. It's a deep-rooted identity that forms around refusing to admit you're capable of hurting anyone. These people don't just avoid guilt, they're addicted to innocence. Their whole emotional world depends on one key: belief. If I admit I'm capable of hurting someone, then I'm no longer lovable, so they choose a different path. The permanent victim. Even when they're the ones causing all the chaos, they find ways to spin the story. You misunderstood. You provoked them. You were too much, too cold, too distant, too emotional, anything but them. Because if they admitted they caused pain, they'd have to confront the shadow they've worked so hard to bury. And that is a confrontation they aren't ready for. Instead, they retreat behind tears and silence. They flip the script, making your pain about them. They weaponize their hurt to dodge accountability. No growth, no evolution. They stay emotionally frozen, stuck, playing a role they picked up long ago to avoid guilt. They became the good one, the one who always meant well, the one who tried their best. And when things fall apart, that's the only story they know how to tell. But here's the cruel twist. When someone is addicted to being the innocent one, they will hurt you just to maintain that illusion that they've never hurt anyone. They'll twist facts, erase events, blame your tone, your timing, your emotions. Because if they're not innocent, they feel like they're nothing. So you end up carrying the weight of their mistakes, bearing the guilt they refuse to face. Jung saw this pattern clearly. It's not just immaturity, it's psychological survival at your expense. There's a reason some people just can't say I'm sorry. It's not because they don't understand what they did. It's because apologizing would cause everything. They built their identity onto collapse. Carl Jung called this psychological inflation. When the ego is so overinflated, so over-identified with perfection, it can't tolerate contradiction. It can't admit error. It can't accept the shadow it desperately avoids. These types of people live inside a fragile mirror. Every reflection must back up their goodness, their intelligence, their moral superiority, because if that image cracks, if anyone sees their flaws, they shatter with it. This is narcissism at its psychological core. Not just vanity or self-obsession, but a brutal rejection of anything that could threaten their perfect self-image. So when they hurt you and you confront them, they don't see the truth. They see danger. You're not holding up a mirror. They see you holding a hammer. And instead of facing the wound, they attack the one pointing it out to them. Accountability isn't growth, it's ego death. To say I was wrong would mean admitting they're not who they pretend to be, that their mask has cracks, that the persona they built is just that, a mask. So they defend it at all costs. They'll twist facts, rewrite history, blame your tone, call you unstable. They'll do anything except own up to what they did. Being wrong isn't just uncomfortable for them, it's unlivable. Their entire emotional survival relies on maintaining the illusion that they're always right, always justified, always the one who is misunderstood. And when you demand accountability, you're not just asking for an apology or threatening the very thing that keeps them psychologically afloat. Jung warned us, when an inner situation is not made conscious, it appears outside as fate. To them, you became faith, punishment, the enemy, not because you did something wrong, but because your truth threatens the false kingdom. They rule from guilt. They don't run from guilt. They run from the collapse of their identity. That's why they avoid the simplest phrase, I'm sorry, because to them, it's not just an admission, it's annihilation. So instead, they choose the easier road, silence, deflection, denial, because ego to them isn't a mask to wear, it's a fortress to live inside. They didn't just hurt you, they had to erase you, because your memory, your existence, it's dangerous to them, not because of anything you did, but because of what your presence reveals. Carl Jung believed that when the ego is fragile, it can't handle contradiction. Any reminder of wrongdoing, any trace of guilt, any reflection of damage becomes a threat to the illusion they've built. So what do? They fall back on the same old defense. They dissociate, deny, and forget, not because they can't remember, but because remembering would break them. You are a living reminder of a truth they can't handle, a mirror they've spent years trying to avoid. So they don't just cut you out of their life, they cut you from their reality, not out of malice, but necessity. If they faced what they did, seriously and honestly, it would mean confronting a version of themselves they've buried under layers of image, maintenance, and that confrontation would feel like death. So instead, they turn the story into a lie. They say you were never that important. They downplay the relationship. They talk about you like you were just a phase. They make you small, so their guilt can shrink with you. This is emotional amnesia, selective forgetting. But it's not about memory. It's a defense mechanism to keep from falling apart. They had to make you vanish not just from their life, but from their reality. And that's why this silence hurts so much, because it's not just absence, it's an eraser. It's the terrifying realization that someone can hold your heart, destroy it, then walk away as if it never existed. Not because they don't care, but because they can't afford to. Because to care would mean their mask would collapse. So they disappear emotionally, psychologically, existentially, and you're left not only grieving what happened, but grieving the terrifying possibility that it never meant anything to them at all. But here's the truth. It did mean something. It meant enough that they had to destroy the evidence, just so they could live with themselves. They didn't forget you. They buried you to keep their fragile world intact. Guilt, in a healthy mind, acts like a compass. It points us back to our values. It whispers, I hurt someone. I should make this right. Carl Jung called this the moral function of the unconscious, the quiet voice inside us that helps us grow by shining a light where we went wrong. But for emotionally immature people, guilt doesn't guide. Instead, it feels like an attack, a threat, an infection. So rather than facing it, they externalize it. They won't say, I feel guilty for what I did to you. Instead, they say, you're making me feel bad. They twist guilt into a weapon and aim it at you. Because, in their world, feeling pain means someone else has to be to blame. So, they project their guilt onto your tone, your timing, your reactions. They punish you for triggering the one emotion that could actually redeem them, their own conscience. And the most heartbreaking part, they convince you that your pain is the problem. They'll tell you, if you hadn't spoken up, or if you had just stayed silent, or if you'd delivered your truth more gently, none of this would have happened. But here's the reality Jung made clear. People who refuse to process guilt don't get rid of it. They hand it off to someone else. You became their emotional scapegoat, the sponge for a conscience they never wanted to carry. And every time you tried to hold them accountable, they didn't hear love. They heard war. Your vulnerability became a battlefield. Your truth, the enemy. Instead of apologizing, they made you question why you ever expected kindness in the first place. Because for them, guilt isn't a guide back to self-awareness. It's a curse they have to purge, no matter who gets burned. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. But these people don't want light. They want insulation. And if that means placing their guilt on your shoulders, they'll do it without hesitation. You weren't asking for too much. You were simply asking for reflection. Honesty is supposed to heal. But when someone sees their own conscience as the enemy, even your honesty becomes unforgivable. There comes a moment on every healing journey when the truth stops whispering and starts screaming. That moment, this is it. You can't wake someone who wants to stay asleep. You can't love someone into awareness. You can't hold someone long enough, patiently enough, purely enough, to make them face what they refuse to see. Carl Jung said it best. You cannot make unconscious people conscious. And yet, you tried. You explained. You forgave. You softened your tone. You swallowed your truth. You gave them chance after chance, thinking, if I just love them right, they'll finally understand. But love doesn't create awareness. Choice does, and awareness demands courage. The kind of courage that most emotionally immature people avoid at all costs, because becoming conscious means taking responsibility. It means stopping the blame. It means stopping the running. It means stopping the projection. It means facing the shadow they've spent a lifetime denying, and most people aren't ready to meet that version of themselves, because it threatens the very foundation they've built their identity on. So they stay asleep, not because they don't see the signs, but because they have learned how to look away, how to numb, how to distract, how to survive without ever evolving. And every time you tried to pull them into the light, they dragged you deeper into the dark, not because they hate you, but because your awareness exposed their denial. And denial doesn't go quietly. It fights, it blames, it shames, it disappears. And so here you are, still reaching, still hoping, still believing that if you just hold on a little longer, they'll finally wake up. But they won't. Not because they can't, but because they don't want to. And that, right there, is the moment you stop trying to fix them and start freeing yourself. This is your point of surrender, not because you gave up on love, but because you finally gave it to the one person who deserves it most. You've spent so long wondering if you were too sensitive, too emotional, too much. But here's something Carl Jung would have whispered in your darkest moment. You weren't weak. You were awake. You saw what they refused to see. You felt what they buried. You named what they denied. That's not weakness. That's clarity. And clarity, my friend, comes at a cost. They didn't erase you because you didn't matter. They erased you because you were the mirror, the one thing they couldn't face without cracking. They needed you gone so they could keep the mask on. But their denial doesn't make your truth disappear. Your pain is real. Your memory is valid. Your experience was never too much. They just didn't have the strength to carry it, so they handed it back to you, wrapped in silence, blame, and shame. But here's what matters. You didn't lose yourself. You're still here, still breathing, still healing. And that means they didn't break you. They revealed you, because real love remembers. Real maturity says, that was my fault. Real healing doesn't come from erasing, it comes from integrating. Let this be the line you draw in the sand. The moment you stop blaming yourself for their fear and start walking toward the person who is always there, even when they made you question her. This is not your ruin, this is your awakening, and you never have to explain your truth again. So, what does all this mean for you? It means this: you didn't lose yourself in all of this chaos. You're still here, you're still breathing, you're still healing. And that speaks volumes. They didn't break you. What they did instead was reveal you, because real love, real maturity, remembers. It says, that was my fault. It doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't pretend it didn't leave a mark. Instead, healing comes from integrating, facing those painful truths, and making peace with them. Let this be your line in the sand. The exact moment when you stop blaming yourself for their fears, when you stop walking on eggshells to keep the peace with people who refuse to face their shadows, and when you start walking towards the one person who's been with you all along, even when they made you question her existence. This isn't your ruin. This is your awakening. And here's the best part. You never have to explain your truth again, because your experience is valid. Your pain is real. Your memory doesn't lie. You are not too sensitive. You are not too emotional. You are not too much. What you were, and what you are, is awake. You saw what they refused to see. You felt what they buried. You named what they denied. And that, my friend, is clarity. Clarity comes at a cost. It means facing difficult truths, but it's a cost worth paying, because it frees you. So, from here on out, choose yourself. Choose to move forward with truth and healing. Remember, people who erase you to protect their ego aren't worth your silence or your pain. You deserve better. You always have, and that means no more running, no more hiding your truth. You deserve to be seen, to be heard, and to be loved, not for who you pretend to be, but for who you truly are. So start walking toward that. And know this: you have already won.